I've spent 3 years trying to forget the smell of expensive perfume and cheap lies. Most people celebrate their 5th anniversary with wood, a symbol of strength and deep roots. My husband, Julian, decided to celebrate ours with a demolition crew. The table was set. I had spent 4 hours in the kitchen making his favorite, braised short ribs. The candles were flickering, casting long, dancing shadows across our living room walls. I was wearing the dress he bought me in Florence, feeling like the luckiest woman in the world. Then the front door opened. Julian didn't come in alone. He walked in with a woman who couldn't have been more than 24. She was wearing a silk slip dress that cost more than my first car, and she was holding his hand with a possessive grip that made my stomach do a slow, agonizing flip. Julian didn't look guilty. He didn't even look surprised to see me there. He looked bored. "Elena," he said, his voice as cold as a morgue slab. "This is Chloe. She's moving in. I've already had your things packed into the guest room. We can discuss the paperwork in the morning." The world didn't stop. The candles didn't go out. The short ribs didn't stop smelling delicious. But inside of me, something shattered so loudly I'm surprised the neighbors didn't call the police. I looked at the woman, Chloe, and she gave me a small, pitying smile that felt like a serrated knife across my throat. "You're still here?" she asked, her voice a high, melodic chirp. "Julian said you'd be gone by 7. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the wine. I just stood there, clutching a linen napkin so hard my knuckles turned white. Julian walked past me, his shoulder brushing mine as if I were a piece of furniture he was planning to replace. He didn't see the fire starting in my eyes. He didn't see the woman I was about to become. "I'm not going to the guest room, Julian," I whispered. My voice sounded strange. Lower, sharper. He paused at the foot of the stairs, not even turning around. "Fine. Sleep on the sofa. Just don't make a scene. It's been a long day." As they disappeared upstairs, the sound of their laughter echoing down the hallway, I realized that my life as I knew it was over. But as I looked at the anniversary gift I had hidden under my seat, a folder that Julian didn't know I possessed, I realized that his long day was only just beginning. Because Julian thought he was replacing a wife. He didn't realize he was evicting a silent partner who held the keys to his entire empire. Have you ever sat in total darkness in a house you thought was your sanctuary, listening to the person you love whisper to someone else in the room above you? It's a specific kind of torture. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a physical blow. I didn't sleep. I sat at that dinner table until the candles burned down to nothing but puddles of wax. My mind was a whirlwind of memories. The way he proposed in the rain, the way we built his architectural firm from a one-room office, the sacrifices I made so he could become the titan of the skyline. I had been his secret weapon. I was the one who handled the contracts he was too busy to read. I was the one who managed the private equity accounts he thought were just savings. He saw me as a housewife who liked to garden. He never realized I was the one keeping the roof over his head. I opened the folder I'd hidden under the chair. Inside were the quarterly audits for Vanguard Design, Julian's firm. He hadn't looked at them in months. He was too busy with Chloe, too busy buying jewelry and fast cars to notice the discrepancies. But I noticed. I'd seen the offshore transfers. I'd seen the forged signatures on the state contracts. Julian was a brilliant architect, but he was a sloppy criminal. As the sun began to peek through the curtains, casting a cold, gray light over the ruins of my anniversary dinner, I stood up. My legs were stiff, my heart was numb, but my mind was clearer than it had ever been. I walked into the kitchen, picked up a pen, and wrote a single sentence on a piece of paper. I left it on the center of the table, right next to the cold short ribs. I didn't pack a suitcase. I didn't take the jewelry. I just grabbed my laptop, my car keys, and that folder. I walked out of that house without looking back, the cool morning air hitting my face like a baptism. I had no home, no husband, and no plan except one. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a high-rise office across town, looking at a man Julian considered his greatest rival. I placed the folder on his desk and smiled. Julian wants a fresh start, I told him. I'm here to make sure it's the most expensive one he's ever had. But as I walked out of that office, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Julian. Not an apology. Not a plea. Just 4 words that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. Check your bank account. The screen on my phone was glowing, but the numbers weren't making sense. $0. Julian hadn't just brought a mistress home. He had conducted a scorched earth campaign. Every joint account emptied. My personal savings gone. He had used the power of attorney I'd given him 3 years ago when I had that surgery to wipe me out completely. I was standing in the middle of a busy sidewalk, people rushing past me to their happy, stable lives, and I had exactly $42 in my purse and a car with a half tank of gas. I felt the panic rising in my throat, that suffocating heat that makes you want to scream until your lungs burst. He wanted me to crawl back. He wanted me to beg for the guest room. He thought that by taking my money he was taking my power. I drove to the only place I had left, a small, dilapidated watchmaker's shop on the outskirts of the city that belonged to my late grandfather. Julian had always hated it. He called it a rotten piece of dirt, and begged me to sell it so he could build a parking lot. I'd kept it out of sentimentality, but now it was my only fortress. The air inside the shop was thick with dust and the smell of old oil. Hundreds of clocks hung on the walls, their ticking creating a rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat. I sat on the floor, the cold wood pressing against my skin, and I finally cried. I cried for the woman who believed in forever. I cried for the 5 years I'd wasted building a pedestal for a man who used it to kick me in the face. But then I heard it. A different kind of ticking. It was coming from behind the heavy oak workbench. I crawled over, my hands shaking, and found a small iron floor safe I'd never noticed before. My grandfather had been a man of many secrets, but this one felt deliberate. I tried every combination I could think of. Birthdays, anniversaries, the year the shop was built. Nothing. Then, I remembered the iron key I'd found in my grandmother's locket years ago. I'd carried it as a charm, never knowing what it opened. The lock turned with a heavy, satisfying clunk. Inside wasn't gold or cash. It was a stack of ledgers and a title deed. My breath caught in my throat as I read the address on the deed. It wasn't for the shop. It was for the land underneath the new Vanguard Design headquarters, the very building Julian was currently standing in, thinking he owned the world. My grandfather hadn't just left me a shop. He had left me the ground Julian's empire was built on. And the lease. It was up for renewal in 30 days. For the next 2 weeks, I lived on black coffee and spite. I slept on a cot in the back of the watchmaker's shop, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 ticking seconds. Every day I watched Julian on the news. He was the man of the year. He was photographed at galas with Chloe on his arm, her dripping in diamonds that were bought with my stolen savings. He looked untouchable. He looked happy. I spent my nights with a forensic accountant I'd known since college, a man who owed me a favor. We went through the ledgers my grandfather left behind. It wasn't just a title deed. It was a record of a silent partnership between my grandfather and Julian's father. Julian's father hadn't built Vanguard alone. He had used my grandfather's capital and my grandfather's land. There was a clause in the original contract, a blood and bone clause. If the successor of the Vanguard line acted with moral turpitude against the successor of the Thorn line, my family, the land reverted instantly, along with any structures built upon it. Julian's father had been a man of honor. He had written that clause to protect my family. Julian, in his arrogance, had never even read the founding documents. I waited until the night of Vanguard's 20th anniversary gala. The entire city's elite were there. The champagne was flowing, and Julian was center stage, preparing to announce his biggest project yet, a multi-billion-dollar skyscraper that would define his legacy. I walked into that ballroom wearing a dress I'd found in a vintage shop. Black silk, simple, deadly. I didn't look like the broken woman who had crawled out of his house a month ago. I looked like the owner of the building he was standing in. I saw him across the room. He was laughing, a glass of crystal in one hand, Chloe's waist in the other. When his eyes met mine, his smile didn't just fade, it vanished. He whispered something to Chloe and started walking toward me, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "What are you doing here, Elena?" he hissed, grabbing my arm. "I told you the settlement is being handled by my lawyers. Don't make a scene." I leaned in, the scent of his expensive cologne making me sick. "I'm not here for a settlement, Julian. I'm here for my rent." I handed him a single legal document. His eyes skimmed the page, and I watched as the blood drained from his face until he was as pale as the marble floors. This is a joke," he stammered, his grip on his glass tightening. "You can't do this." "The blood and bone clause, Julian," I whispered. "You brought a mistress into our home on our anniversary. You emptied my accounts. That's moral turpitude in any court in this state. You have 24 hours to vacate the building." "My building." The glass in his hand shattered. The sound rang out across the silent ballroom like a starting pistol. The gala wasn't a celebration anymore. It was a funeral. The next 48 hours were a symphony of chaos. Julian tried to fight it, of course. He hired the most expensive legal team in the country, but the Thorn documents were airtight. My grandfather had been a genius. He'd predicted that a man like Julian would eventually come along. Vanguard Design went into a tailspin. Without a headquarters, their insurance was voided. Without insurance, their multi-billion-dollar contracts were cancelled. The titan of the skyline was watching his empire crumble in real time. But the best part, Chloe. The moment the money stopped flowing, the vibrancy vanished. I watched a paparazzi video of her screaming at him on the sidewalk as she loaded her designer luggage into a car. She didn't want a man, she wanted a bank account. And Julian, in his pursuit of something new, had traded his foundation for a mirage. I moved back into the watchmaker's shop. I didn't want the penthouse. I didn't want the short ribs or the Florence dresses. I wanted the ticking. I wanted the reminder that time moves for no one, and eventually everyone's clock runs out. I started a new firm, Thorn Restoration. We didn't build skyscrapers. We fixed the foundations of old buildings that people had forgotten. The city loved the story, the betrayed wife who took back the land. Clients started pouring in. Real people. People who valued strength over glass. A month passed. I was sitting at my grandfather's workbench, repairing a 19th-century grandfather clock, when the bell above the door chimed. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. The air shifted. That heavy, arrogant presence was back, but it was dampened. Felt damp. I turned around. Julian was standing there. He was wearing a suit that looked like he'd slept in it. His hair was a mess, and he'd lost at least 15 pounds. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. He didn't say a word. He just stood there for a long moment, looking at me, looking at the clocks, looking at the life I had built without him. Then his knees buckled. He hit the floor with a heavy thud, his head bowing until it touched the dusty wood. And then the sound started. A low, ragged sob that tore through the quiet of the shop. "Elena," he choked out, his voice cracking. "Please. I made a mistake. I was blind. I was a fool. Deutsch is gone. Everything is gone. I have nothing left." I stayed on my stool, my hands still covered in clock oil. I watched him cry, and for a second I felt a flicker of the old Elena, the one who wanted to reach out and comfort him. But then I remembered the smell of that perfume. I remembered the zero balance on my screen. I looked at the clock I was fixing. The pendulum was swinging perfectly. "You're wrong, Julian," I said, my voice as steady as the ticking. "You don't have nothing. You have exactly what you gave me on our anniversary. You have a fresh start." Julian didn't get up. He stayed there on the floor, his shoulders shaking, looking like a discarded piece of the very rubble he used to build on. I let him cry. I didn't offer him a hand, and I didn't offer him a glass of water. I just watched him, realizing that the man I had loved was never real. He was just a facade I had helped him maintain. "I'll do anything," he whispered, looking up at me with eyes that were red and desperate. "I'll sign over the remaining assets. I'll go to the board and admit it was all my fault. Just don't let me lose the name Elena. Don't let me be a nobody." That was it. Even now, at his absolute lowest, he was worried about his name, his reputation. He wasn't crying because he missed me. He was crying because the world finally saw him for what he was. "The name is already gone, Julian," I said. "Vanguard is being liquidated. I've already bought the intellectual property and the remaining contracts. I'm merging them into Thorn Restoration." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. You bought my firm." "I bought the pieces worth saving," I corrected. "The architects who actually did the work. The engineers you ignored. The people you treated like dirt while you were out being vibrant. They have jobs now. You don't." He stood up then, his legs shaky. He tried to pull himself together to find that old Julian swagger, but the suit didn't fit anymore. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? You're a monster, Elena." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that startled even me. "No, Julian. I'm a watchmaker. I know exactly how much time you have left before the bank forecloses on that penthouse. You have 3 days. I suggest you start packing. Or better yet, Chloe probably left a few empty suitcases you can use." He walked to the door, his hand trembling on the handle. He turned back one last time, a flicker of genuine terror in his eyes. "Where am I supposed to go?" "The same place you sent me," I said, turning back to my workbench. "Wherever the $42 in your pocket takes you." As the door closed behind him, the shop felt lighter. The air was cleaner. But I knew Julian wasn't done. A man like that doesn't just go away. He was like a cracked foundation. He'd keep shifting until he took everything down with him. And I had one more secret buried in those ledgers that he didn't know about yet. The weeks that followed were the busiest of my life. Thorn Restoration wasn't just a business. It was a movement. We were reviving the city's history. But as I dove deeper into Vanguard's old files I now legally owned, I found something that made the blood and bone clause look like a bedtime story. Julian hadn't just been sloppy. He'd been dangerous. The new skyscraper project, the one he was going to announce at the gala, was a death trap. He had knowingly approved substandard steel to save $20 million. He had bribed the city inspectors to look the other way. If that building had gone up, it would have collapsed within 5 years, likely killing hundreds of people. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had betrayed the entire city. I was sitting in my office, the same office Julian used to occupy, staring at the blueprints. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Had a choice. I could bury this, protect the Thorn name I had just reclaimed, and avoid a massive scandal. Or I could finish what I started. My phone rang. It was my lawyer. "Elena, Julian is at the station. He's trying to file a civil suit against you for illegal seizure of assets. He's claiming the Thorn documents were forged." I looked at the blueprints again. I looked at the signatures on the steel contracts. Julian wasn't just trying to get his money back. He was trying to drag me down with him. He was willing to risk a disaster just to win a petty argument. "Let him file it," I said, my voice cold and hard. "In fact, tell the press he's filing it. I want as many cameras there as possible." "Elena, are you sure? The scandal could hurt your new firm." "The scandal isn't mine," I replied. "I'm just the one turning on the lights." The next morning, the courthouse steps were swarming with reporters. Julian was there, looking slightly better, wearing a new suit he'd clearly bought on credit. He was smiling for the cameras, playing the role of the wronged visionary. He saw me getting out of my car and his smile widened into a sneer. "It's over, Elena," he shouted so the mics could hear him. "The truth is coming out." "You're right, Julian," I said, walking toward him. I wasn't holding a lawyer's hand. I was holding a black suitcase. The truth is finally coming out. The courtroom was packed. Julian sat at the plaintiff's table, looking smug. He had a lawyer who looked like a shark in a pinstripe suit. My lawyer sat next to me, silent. The judge looked at Julian. "Mr. Miller, you are claiming that the Thorn land deed and the subsequent seizure of Vanguard Design were based on fraudulent documents." "That's correct, Your Honor," Julian said, standing up. "My ex-wife used my emotional state during our divorce to manufacture a crisis. She stole my life's work." The judge turned to me. "Ms. Thorn, do you have a response?" I stood up. I didn't look at the judge. I looked at the camera at the back of the room, the one live streaming to every news outlet in the state. "I don't have a response to his claim, Your Honor," I said. "Because his claim is irrelevant. I am here to discuss the Legacy Towers project." Julian's smug expression faltered. "That's a private matter. It has nothing to do with this suit." "It has everything to do with the public safety," I said, opening my suitcase. I pulled out the original steel contracts and the lab reports Julian had tried to burn. "These are the metallurgical reports for the steel currently being used in the foundations of Legacy Towers. They show a 40% failure rate under stress." The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Julian's lawyer whispered something to him, his face turning gray. "I have also submitted these documents to the district attorney and the Federal Building Commission," I continued, my voice echoing in the stillness. "Julian Miller didn't just lose his work. He tried to build a graveyard in the center of our city. He didn't just trade his wife. He traded human lives for a bigger bonus." Julian lunged across the table. "You lying bitch. I'll kill you." He didn't get far. 2 bailiffs tackled him to the floor before he could even reach the bar. The cameras caught everything. The rage, the desperation, the mask of the visionary, finally being torn away to reveal the monster beneath. As they led him out in handcuffs, this time for felony fraud and endangerment, I didn't feel a sense of triumph. I just felt a profound sense of relief. The ticking in my head finally stopped. The debt was paid. The Legacy Towers project was demolished before it ever got past the 3rd floor. It was a massive financial hit for the city, but it was a victory for the soul of the community. I spent the next year working with the city council to turn that land, my land, into a public park. We called it Grandfather's Rest. I kept the watchmaker's shop, but I turned the upstairs into a training center for women who had been through what I'd been through. Women who had been discarded, wiped out, and told they were nothing. We taught them trade skills, financial management, and most importantly, we taught them that their value isn't tied to the man they stand next to. Julian is serving 12 years in a minimum security prison. I heard Chloe tried to visit him once to ask for the location of a hidden account she thought he had. When he told her there was nothing left, she left him in the visiting room and never looked back. Sometimes I go to the park and sit on the bench near the clock tower we built in the center. I watch the kids play and the couples walk hand in hand. I think about that anniversary dinner, the short ribs, the candles, the perfume. Feels like it happened to another person in another lifetime. I realized that Julian didn't destroy me. He was the fire that burned away the wood so the iron could show. He thought he was taking my home, but he was actually giving me the world. Life is like a complex clock. Sometimes the gears get jammed. Sometimes a spring breaks. But as long as you have the key, you can always wind it back up. You can always start again. And this time you'll know exactly how to keep the time. It's been 5 years since that night. I'm standing in the park, the sun setting behind the skyline I helped protect. My daughter. Yes, I have a daughter now, a fierce little thing with my eyes and a spirit that refuses to be quiet, is running toward the clock tower. I'm not the titan of the skyline. I'm Nora Thorne. And I am finally truly home. The betrayal didn't define me. The rise didn't define me. The fact that I'm still standing, still ticking, still building, that's what matters. Julian thought he was the architect of his life, but he forgot that every building needs a foundation. And I am the strongest foundation there is. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've lived through something similar, If you've ever had to find your own iron in the fire, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. It's the strongest thing you own.